Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and we've now moved on to the afternoon of the 3rd of September 1651. So if you've been watching our earlier videos, and bear in mind they're all going to be on our playlist, you'll also be able to see them on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and please do share them. We've now moved from the fighting on the western side of the city, in other words the fighting on the banks of the Teme and on the Severn, and now we turn our attention to the eastern side. Now the problem with the eastern side is the fact that Worcester city over the years, post-medieval, has sprung up quite a bit, and if you wander around Worcester today and leave the city centre, we have all the council estates of Ronkswood, Tolladine, Blackpole, all those sort of areas have now sprung up. So the problem is, if you want to see the untouched battlefield, it's really best to go over to the western side of the city, so Powick, the River Meadows and so on. And that's the plan. Cromwell wanted an open fight where he could make use of his cavalry, his infantry, and had full vision to allow his artillery to do their damage. Now the problem is, on the eastern side, it's that built up today, it's very difficult to find even a shred of evidence or a shred of the landscape that resembles it at the time of 1651. But we've actually come up to Perry Wood. Now, Perry Wood, years ago, even at the time of the Battle of Worcester, was a very big wood. And if you think back to an earlier video, we were talking about Cromwell's men moving onto the high ground around the city, and that includes Buns Hill, Perry Wood, where we are now, all the way across to Albury Hill in Rainbow Hill. So Cromwell had full control of this high ground, and Perry Wood is part of that high ground. So there were guns up here, and not actually in the woodland that we're in, but in the open bits that overlook the city in that direction over there. But the important thing about Perry Wood is London Road flowed through it. Now today, if you wander down London Road, you're actually wandering down the new London Road. Where we're actually stood is the original London Road, and it doesn't look much, as you can see. It's nothing more than a track through a wood, but that was pretty much all it was, and it was the main road down to London. So it flowed down into the city behind where Ian is filming there. Now we said at the start of this video that we're now looking at the fight on the eastern side and what happened in the afternoon. So just a quick recap. So this is the situation in around about 3 o'clock. So once again, Leslie is sat on Pitchcroft Racecourse, famously not moving even an inch. So they're just sat there watching the battle getting played out. And even to this day, we don't know why. Some people say it's because of all the arguments in the run up to the battle. Other people say messages didn't get through and so on. So Leslie's up here. Hamilton is just beyond us, really, at the bottom of the hill in the area around the blockhouse, and Charles is also down there in the area of Sidbury. So we're actually up here on Perry Wood in London Road flowing through it, and we've been really concentrating on this side of the battlefield, and like I said, this is the most untouched part of the battlefield, apart from the new hedges and so on that's planted in there. And as I said, Keith tried to hold on to the church at Powick and also the bridge, and obviously Pittscotty was relaxing in the late summer sunshine down at the confluence of the Severn. But unfortunately, what actually happened is Dean forced the crossing over the Severn here, over the Teme I should say, and obviously these bridge of boats that were put in over the Severn in the Teme allowed Fleetwood and Oliver Cromwell to cross. So basically the poor old Scots, if you want to call them that, the Royalist invaders, were being wiped out in this area of the battlefield. So all morning most of the fighting was taking place over here. So by lunchtime, Pittscotty's Highlanders, Keith, Dial in Montgomery were all fighting hedge by hedge, heading back along the river plain and across into the city. Now if Leslie failed to get messages saying join in the fight, for Christ's sake join in the fight, he would have seen Scots fleeing into the city. So why did he not react? We will never ever know. Only he is the man that knows what happened on the 3rd of September 1651. But all the way through that morning, Cromwell's guns on all this high ground here were bombarding the Royalist lines. And remember, they tried to restore a lot of the defences, but as we know, most of these defences were not in a good shape. We even think Fort Royal, that we've also mentioned, may not have actually been completed at the time of the battle. It may have been pretty much slighted. We know Cromwell's men does actually say there is a fort partially sighted on the outskirts of Worcester, Fort Royal, as we know. So the fighting over this side, the side we're on now, has really been an artillery duel and probably skirmishing. There would probably been skirmishing all along this eastern side. However, when the King, Charles, and even the Duke of Hamilton realised it was going horribly wrong here, and he would have had people fleeing into the city saying it had gone horribly wrong, Charles and the Duke of Hamilton decided to arrange a counter-attack, and you will see this on the next map. So this is late afternoon, 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. So once again, Leslie hasn't moved here. Pittscottie, Keith, Montgomery and Dial are all in full retreat, fleeing into the city there, being followed by Dean and Fleetwood. Interesting fact, Cromwell recrosses the bridge of boats and he comes around to the eastern side of the city. All the way through this fight, by the way, Cromwell is riding on a white horse, spurring his men on, whereas for most of the battle, Charles is being in the cathedral tower. Not a good way of commanding troops, to be fair. So Charles in Hamilton leads a counterattack, and the counterattack leaves the city wall behind and it goes uphill, fighting uphill, to take on the parliamentarians on the high ground. Not a good idea, to be fair. It's a counterattack at the end of the day. It's going horribly wrong here. Let's try and force our way out of the city here. But they fight it up the hill, which is not good. Fighting uphill is always tiring. And at the top, they would have met, most of the soldiers up here, they would have met is the new model army. So they would have seen on the top of this hill members of the new model army wearing their faithful red coats. But remember, the eastern side was also predominantly made up, boosted up the numbers, with members of the militia. And we actually know down here would have been the Worcester militia, the Essex militia, even the Cheshire militia that fought so valiantly at Warrington and also at Wigan. Remember, they've all moved down here. They've all mustered here at Worcester, mainly at Evesham, and then come across. And they were up here. And as I said, Hamilton and Charles would have fought their way up this hill, up London Road, even in the wooded hillside either side, and they would have fought at the top here against Cromwell's men. And what you have to remember is Cromwell, who had finished wiping up the Scots over at Powys, had come back across the river bridge and was also up here. So Cromwell's moved his men wherever he needed them, and that shows what sort of a tactician that Oliver Cromwell is. It was a hard flung fight up here on the high ground, but unfortunately it failed. Some people say there were several attacks up this hill and every single one failed. In the end, Charles's men ended up fleeing back down the hill, back towards their fort, Fort Royal, which was probably not completed, and back into the area of Sidbury. We do know that the Duke of Hamilton was shot. He would have been shot somewhere up here. It might have been here, it might have been further up, or might have been further down the hill. We know he was shot in the area of Perrywood in London Road. Some people say he took a musket ball to the leg. Most people say a slug shot. It was probably from a small cannon, probably something like a robinet. We know his leg was shattered, completely shattered, and they carried him, his men carried him, probably on a blanket or a coat, carried him back down the hill, back into Sidbury, and took him to where he was living. And at the time, his billet was the commandery, often and incorrectly called the headquarters for the Royalists. It was the Duke of Hamilton's billet. Charles's headquarters were probably in King Charles's house, as it's called today, or may have even been in the Guildhall, or maybe even in the Cathedral Tower, which is where he was controlling the most of the battle from. Anyway, what we do know is the Duke of Hamilton, this leader of the Royalist army at the Battle of Worcester, died of his wounds several days later, and that's a story for another day. But hopefully this has given you a little bit of an insight that what was going on up here on the 3rd of September in the late afternoon, around about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So the battle has fallen apart on the western side, mainly because these boat bridges made the team and the 7 invisible. Cromwell was very, very good at moving troops around where they were needed. They were needed on this bank, so Cromwell brought his cavalry across, and then when they were finished over there, he brought his cavalry back over to where they were needed when Hamilton and Charles attempted to break out. But what we know is it failed here. And at this moment in the day, late afternoon, especially when we start talking about 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, it is a rout, almost a rout. Troops from the Scottish army, the Royalists, were fleeing downwards into the city centre, and those that were fighting on the western side of the Severn were now streaming in across the river bridge. It's all collapsing for the Royalist cause. But famously, the battle does not end until around about 10 o'clock in the evening. Some people say fighting in the streets even into about midnight on the 4th of September. So it's not very nice. The Royalist army totally outnumbered and being outmanoeuvred every time by the tactician of Oliver Cromwell, and at the end of the day, the professional army, the new model army. Anyway, on that note, there's still more to come. It's not night time yet, so we'll see you soon. Bye bye.